Okay, so I'm here with Pelle Soeborg on Skype. He's a very talented modeler from Denmark, and you may recognize the name. He's been writing for Model Railroader magazine for a long time as a regular columnist, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes,
Has
yes.
has several books as well on the topic. And welcome. I want to thank you very much for joining me here today, Pelle. It's really great to I call this e-meeting because we're electronically meeting. But
Yeah, well,
yeah, I've been a fan of your work and following your photos on Facebook, and just am always flabbergasted by the level of realism in the pictures that you post. And so I really do appreciate you coming on to talk to us today. And I'm sure that the audience for the channel will really enjoy this talk that we're going to have here. So anyway, that being all said, you've been a columnist for Model Railroader magazine for a long time now. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to writing an article for the magazine?
yeah, my approach is to make it as visual as possible because when I was posting my first articles in Model Railroader magazine, I got so many questions. So I realized that most of it people actually could read if they actually read the article, but they looked at the pictures and read the captions. So you can actually read most of my articles just by looking at the pictures and reading the captions. So that's my approach.
I think that's a good approach because it makes it easy for people like me who would prefer to look at pictures and not read as much.
Yeah.
I like that. So now you've also written several books. Is there a particular favorite of yours, of your books that you wrote?
Oh, my favorite is always the latest one. So, but I have made a couple of books about small projects, some weathering or freight car load, stuff like that. And they have been very popular, I know. So I made one that was named Done in a Day, and it had the nickname at the Kambach offices. They called it Gone in a Day.
Gone in a Day.
Yeah, because it sold so well.
Oh, I see. See what I mean? I'm a little slow on the uptake there. That's pretty good, though. So there's an interesting thing as I was sort of reading about you and sort of researching before this chance that I had to talk to you. I found out that your background really is in artistic design and graphic design. And
Yes.
I wonder if you could maybe kind of talk a little bit about how your artistic inclination maybe informs your modeling or gives you some maybe a different insight into how you're making things look the way you do.
Well, it's hard for me to tell because I have never been anything else. So it's just the way I model what I see, basically, and try to, yeah, well, you cannot model it one-to-one, of course, because you have to compress a lot of stuff, but you still have to make it so it doesn't look compressed. And I think that's the key to it. So, well, if it looks all right to you, it'll probably look all right to most people.
Sure. One of the interesting things I thought is, and I've seen enough dioramas and railroad layouts and stuff to realize it's weird because I know that the places that you model are not actual places. These
Yes.
are places where you've taken a building from here and something else from here and a road from over there and you put it
Yes.
all
Yes.
together.
Yes.
And I'd swear when I'm looking at a picture of that you've taken of your latest masterpiece, for example, or even the Danberg Sub, I noticed when I saw this in person in Utah that there's something about it that's just a genuine, realistic looking place. Like I feel like I'm looking at a picture of somewhere that actually exists.
Yes. But the key to that is to scratch build actual buildings, because when I on my trips in the U.S., I always look for interesting buildings. To you, it'll probably look boring and not interesting, But when I see a building not too big, of course, I can use for a layout. Yeah, well, I take pictures of it, and hopefully I can get on all four sides of the building. That's usually a problem because you can normally get to three sides, but there's always something that's blocked off, and then I have to guess how it looks at that side. But that's, I think, to answer your question, the key is if you put actual buildings in your scene, it'll look more realistic, authentic, if you want.
I guess kind of an aspect of doing that would also be to match what would be like. It seems like yours are mostly Midwestern type scenes or Western railroad scenes for North America, yes. Right?
It's I use building within the area, but the Midwest is vast, so you can actually drive many hundred miles and find buildings for your towns.
Certainly. Yeah, I have noticed that all the photos I've seen of your work reflect railroading in North America. And yes. I just wonder, being from Denmark, someone might imagine that you'd model places closer to where you live. And what made you so interested in North American railroading or railroads?
Yeah, that was actually a coincidence. In the early 90s, I went to a specialty bookstore in Copenhagen. They had all kinds of interesting books if you were interested in warships or classic cars or stuff like that. And I don't even remember what I went there for, but when I was waiting in line to pay for whatever I got, well, there was this basket full of model railroader magazines. And I picked one of them up and looked at the cover, and I was actually blown away by the realism of the layouts of the cover. So they sold them for nothing. I don't know how they had ended there, because you normally didn't see American model train magazines in Denmark, but I ended up buying them all. And I was in between hobbies, I had Harley Davidson's motorcycles as my hobby before that. I had to sell my bikes to get the money for the down payment on our first home. And so to me, the model railroad hobby seemed very affordable to me. So that's how I started. I was not a model railroader until then.
It's funny you mentioned how it was affordable. People would argue about that nowadays.
Yeah, I know.
There's a lot of complaining that goes on about how expensive everything is. Oh, that's great. A quick thing about that. So I've seen the Danberg Sub in person because it's over in Provo, Utah at Exact Rail and Train Life's warehouse. And, to see that in person, I want to mention this because people watching maybe don't know that it's there, and it might be local to them enough to where they can go see your work in person. And I found it to be really an amazing piece of museum quality art, more than anything else. How did that end up all the way from Denmark in Utah?
Yeah, that's the thing that happened was that after 40 years, my wife wanted a divorce, and we had to sell the house. And with that, I lost my train room. And fortunately, I had made that layout not, you could say movable, not portable, but it was made in sections. So it could be shipped to anywhere in the world, actually. And I tried to post on Facebook if anyone was interested, and there was a few that were interested, but when it came to realities, they kind of jumped. And I thought I would never be able to sell it, so I started finding people who wanted to buy some of the structures on my layout. And out of the blue, I was contacted by the Train Life people, Exact Rail, and Dan Larsen, and they were interested in buying it. And I told them what I expected to get for my layout, and they were willing to pay it. And it was a big thing to figure out how to ship it. Much would it cost to put it in a container and have it shipped all the way to the US? And the biggest thing was actually, would it survive the shipping? So, but we agreed on the terms, and I had a container delivered, and I packed it. It took me a week. I tried to stabilize it as much as possible because you never know what a container will face on the ocean. And it was really, really excited to hear when they opened the door on that container when it arrived at their place in Utah. But it survived, and there was very, very little damage, so it worked.
Oh, that's lucky.
Yeah.
Because you never do know, because, those intermodal containers go on trucks, they go on ships, they go on trains. I mean, there's a lot of...
Yeah, and the container I got had a big, big dent in it. So I thought if a forklift truck or anything just bounced in the side of that container with my layout in it, it would be gone.
Oh, man. Well, I'm glad it made it there. And it did make it pretty good. I mean, what I saw was like, oh, this is really cool. I mean, I got down and got some low pictures of the cornfield and stuff like that. And the backdrop. That's another thing that I found really cool was there's one place where there's a road crossing.
Yes.
I got low and took a picture, and it's hard to tell where the backdrop starts and where the layout ends.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so they did a good job, I think, putting it back together when it got here, or to the States anyway. And that's something that kind of jogged my memory about something that I was thinking about asking you about. I've noticed on your pictures that you post to Facebook that something else that makes it look real is that everything's in focus. So are you using a photo stacking technique there? Or?
Yes, I do. And the most recent pictures I take, they're all taken with my iPhone. So you can do the same thing with an iPhone. And you know an iPhone has an off-centered camera, so you can actually take pictures from an HO scale person's perspective.
Yeah, I put my phone right on the layout sometimes doing layout tours to get what I like to refer to as the railfan angle. You're down there.
Exactly.
Down there.
And that's actually a good way to check your modeling.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because if it looks real from that perspective on a small camera, getting a low angle, right? Yeah, and I have noticed that the rolling stock and everything else. We were talking off camera a little bit before we started the camera here, and you said something about, and it resonated with me, about how when you look at something, you see it with a different perspective than someone who lives here and sees these kind of things every day. So if I see a UP locomotive, for example, it's like, oh, it's another yellow locomotive to me. But for someone who doesn't see that every day, it gives you a fresher perspective about seeing, you might notice a detail that I would just blow off because I've seen 100 of these things in the past 2 months.
Yeah, and maybe I find a building interesting that you would just find boring and just pass it without paying any attention to it. So,
yeah, I just wonder, do you have any tips or advice for a beginner who might want to eventually achieve that same level of realism that you're able to reproduce in your modeling?
Well, yeah, one tip I can give is colors. Be very aware of which colors you use because many people tend to use too dark colors, too bright colors. So I use a lot of white in my colors. If I paint a building, which is red brick, for instance, I still add a lot of white to the color. Even you can buy what you call brick red as a out of the bottle color. You still have to add a lot of white to make it look realistic on your layout because you don't have the sun to bleach it. So as long as you kind of make it lighter colors than you normally would, it'll look more realistic.
So you're sort of washing things out, per se?
Yeah, you could say that. You could just make also. You saw the layout, my layout in Utah,
Yes.
and it's you see it's summer on my layout, but still I didn't use the actual flock grass color summer. I used all different. I used early fall, late fall, and yellow grass, and a lot of that. Because if I used the color summer, it will just look too green, too dark green, simply. So it's pay attention to how the colors are in the real world, because they are not as bright as you think.
Yeah, the way you're describing this makes a lot of sense to me, because really what you're talking about is trying to not make things too vivid. Because, for example,
Yeah.
if I see a photograph of a place and someone has used Photoshop to really enhance it, you can say, oh, this has been Photoshopped. You can see it right away. So really what you're
Yes.
talking about is making sure that your dioramas don't look Photoshopped, basically.
Yes. True.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now, because now that I think about it, colors don't really scale down the same way that that buildings do, for example. So you're kind of compressing the color by making it less vivid. That's an interesting
Yes.
concept. Okay, well, I want to thank you. I like I said before, I know that you have a lot of things that you're into there, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I really want to thank you. I'm sure that the audience is going to really enjoy this talk that we've had, and I hope that maybe sometime in the future, maybe if you have a project that you're working on that you'd like to share, you're always welcome to come on the show here. And I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Pelle.
Thank you.
And now back to me in the studio.